So here we are, and we are, if I can actually do this properly, we are Rapid Application Development Lesson 5, Part 1, as we record the YouTube video. Today we're going to be talking about menus, common dialog boxes like the font dialog, the color dialog that are built in. We're going to kind of touch on the fact that there's other ones like the open file dialog, save file dialog, and these kind of are common objects that exist within the .NET environment and that are available across .NET. So for VB, C#, and so on. We're also going to talk about methods and how to write your own methods as opposed to, just a double click and create an event handler type method, right? So we're not going to just do that today. Okay. We're also going to talk about context menus and how to write those. Those are pretty important when it comes to you modifying things on your form. However, not always useful. And so you might notice that certain forms that come with an application may not have a context menu available, right? So in this particular case, we're just showing you how to do it, and it might be something that's pertinent or relevant for your particular application as you write it. So let's talk about menus a little bit. Okay, so we have the menu bar, right, on top of the menu. And I know it sounds funny, we're talking about menus like you've never seen them before, right? But if you ever use a Windows application, really, you've seen how menus work, right? The challenge is when you're writing your own app and you're doing it in a Windows environment, I would recommend to you that you stick with the Windows standard way of writing a menu. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Well, if I go back, if I shift over to, where do I have this now? Here we go. If I go back to Visual Studio here, if you notice, you've got on the file menu, you have File, Edit, View. You have some other ones that are unique to Visual Studio, Build, Debug, and so on. But at the end, you have something like Window and Help, right? Typically, what I'd like you to do when you program your menus on your app is stick with the standard Windows format for menus. So File, Edit, View, and then something like a Help at the end with some other customized menu items that are relevant to your app, okay? Why do we do this? Why am I telling you to write menus the exact same way? Anybody? Yes, Kevin.
It's for formality because everyone does it this way, so then you can mark it to go protected. Users are happy because they're used to it.
I'm used to it, right? If I look at a form, you make an app, and it's like got menus on the right side of the screen or something weird, I'm going to complain, right? Or if menus don't exist on an app, I'm going to start complaining, right? I'm going to go, damn it, this app sucks, right? Because I expect menus to be file. There's no file menu. I don't know how to save, even if it has an icon, right? So you've got a menu bar, and we're going to also learn how to do icon bars and so on as well, right? And so we're going to talk about when we do icon bars or menu bars or when you do buttons, what I'd like you to do, again, we learned this last lesson, is use the same shared event handler. Okay, so don't write a different event handler unless you absolutely need to for a menu option that's exactly the same as a button option, that's exactly the same as an icon option. We give these options to users, icons, menus, buttons, to make it convenient for them to use our app, right? Because some people like buttons, other people like icons, some people like like actual menus, and other people actually don't like any of that stuff. They like shortcut keys. So we're going to, that's where we're going over all these kinds of options to make your application as recognizable as a Windows application as much as possible. Okay, so some standards for Windows. That's what we're saying. We're going to do this in something that C# has called, and actually VB does have it as well. It's available to anything within Visual Studio, called the Menu Designer, right? Menu Designer is like a fancy name for when you click on, when you create the menu, right, all of a sudden it pops out this little, it tries to help you write the menu itself, right? And there's two ways, or a couple ways of doing this kind of thing we're going to go over. And menus have different properties, just like all the objects out there. For example, the name property, you should name your menu. That should be custom to you. Now, some of the name properties for the menu are pretty good, like menu of one, you're going to see is pretty. It's it's not like it's an odd named property. The text property for the menu, so what it looks like when you actually the menu itself, and any kind of quick event similar to a button for each menu option. So each menu item has these properties: the property, the text property, it's the name property, text property, and click event. The name properties for the actual menus, like if you write file as the name for a menu item, which I recommend that you should have a file, then actually it'll code it pretty good, right? So you don't have to change the names of the menus too much because they're actually written pretty good as it is. You'll see. So let's take a look. So how do you do this? So in Visual Studio, you would go to your menus and toolbars section of your toolbox, right? There's two ways to do it. You can double click on this, or you can drag and drop like we did for all the other objects. If you drag and drop this menu strip onto your form, all of a sudden there's a menu item will form, a menu strip will form on the form of your app, and then from there it'll allow you to start typing things in. You'll see at the bottom of the app itself, you'll have this in the component section. You'll see this component called Menu Strip 1 that appears at the bottom of your component strip, right? So to signify that you do have an active menu that's attached to your form, right? Now remember, this menu, right, is only available in the container that you've dragged and dropped it into, right? So if you have a multiple form application, one form of your app may have it, and the other ones may not, right? And the reason for this is because you may want to make certain menu items available to certain parts of your app that are slightly different. And we'll get to that later on in the course. So how do we do that? So once you've got this menu strip, and it'll look just like this. The menu strip will appear at the top of your app, right? It'll say type here. Right? I know it sounds silly, but this is where you type your first name, and your first name should be file, because that's going along with Windows standard menus, right? So if you type file, if you type the ampersand like we did before for other shortcut keys for your file, it'll mean that the F, is the shortcut key for file, the file menu. And if you notice, you can do two things. You could tab across, and you can type in the next menu, or you can click down lower so you can make a sub-menu item of the file menu. Okay, so you can have, you can form your menus like you would normally see them. So you have file, and then underneath that you might have a open and save option, right? And an exit, right? Because that's typically what we see in a Windows. So I recommend to you, if you don't know the standard Windows web menus to be consistent, if you don't know how to do it, look at any normal Windows app. And especially things like written by Microsoft, for example, a Word application or PowerPoint or even Visual Studio. And you'll see that in there's the standard items that you would have in every application. So let's take a look at that, what I mean. So example, in File, you would have New, right? And then Open, and maybe an Exit for sure, and then some kind of Save option. And it's separated by these bars, which we're going to talk about, the separator, right? Some of them also have these icons that appear on the left. We're not going to cover that right now, but there are ways of putting an icon in addition to just a menu item. Right, so the menu item, and then, you have icons. And the same thing with your edit. There's standard things that you want to put in the edit, like undo and so on. What's the challenge of making it like a real, functional edit menu? What's the challenge there if you put undo and redo and all that stuff? How do we do that? How do we program that? Memory storage, but how would you do it? Do you know? Where do you save it? An array or even a database, right? So the thing is, if you start doing it, it's gonna be so many options, so many actions that you're going to save that the user is going to do, and then you're going to have to backtrack and programmatically do the same actions backwards. Right, if they undo, right? So it's not an easy thing to do. It takes a little bit of programming to do an undo button or even a redo button because you have to keep track of users' commands, right? So my recommendation to you is if you're really ambitious and you want to do a true edit, like undo, redo, and all that kind of stuff, I would think twice. It takes a lot of work, and there's some tricky stuff. You can look at some examples on the internet, which I'd be happy to accept, as long as you let me know that you've seen an example that you want to use for your undo, redo. especially if it's an addition to what you're doing for your app. It's not a requirement, right? So just let me know, saying, Tom, I've got this great undo redo thing that I'm adding in as an option for my app because I want to get extra marks. Hello, right? And here's where it is. I'm getting it from this particular location. This is where I learned how to do it, right? As an example, right? So don't call it like it's your own. Say, hey, Tom, my name is Peter, and by the way, I wrote this cool undo option that looks exactly like the one that you can find online. That's not cool, right? So please let me know about it, like it says in your assignment. Okay. And again, the same thing with View. Sometimes you'll have the ability in View to activate things like a toolbar, right? You'll activate and deactivate toolbars and so on. Those things are not as difficult to do. Like if you have a toolbar section, and if you click on the toolbar with a check mark, you can activate and deactivate things on your form, on your app. That's okay, and those are good uses of a menu. Okay. So when you type the text property, again, if I click on the menu itself and I look at the text property, here's that ampersand that basically tells me that that's the shortcut key for my my menu, my top-level menu file, as an example, right? And I can change the text property here if I want. And in the menu designer itself, I'm just going to skip this one. If you notice, automatically, when you create a menu item like File, it's going to create the name property as File Tool Strip Menu Item. That's perfectly fine. So in this particular case, I've asked you to create context relative, variable names or object names. But in this case, when you're creating a menu, I think Visual Studio kind of names it properly for you. So File Tool Strip Menu Item, you're not going to have more than one, so that's a kind of a good name, right? Because typically on a particular container, File Tool Strip Menu Item, and again, it relates to the parent container, whatever that container is. So if you have more than one form, they're not going to clash. It's not like if you access File Tool Strip Menu Item on form number 1, and then you have another one for form number 2, whatever that form is in your multi-form application, they're not going to clash because it's relative to the context that it's in, which is the container, right? So, and the same thing, you can change the name property if you want. Like, let's say, for example, you really don't like File Tool Strip Menu Item as the name of your object. You can change it, but I recommend that you leave it alone. There's another way to change stuff, and I think this is probably, I don't know, and you have a lot more control from this perspective if you do it this way. You can use the menu designer. So let's take a look at that if I shift back into Visual Studio here. So here I am in Visual Studio, and I want to create this new app, right? So right now, if you notice in my Solution Explorer, I've got nothing. So I'm going to create my new app. So I'm going to go New Project like we've done before, and this time I'm just going to call it lesson 5 underscore menu example. I can call it whatever I want, right? So in this particular case, I just want to make it so it's not the same as everything else. So here I've got my form, and again, just to demonstrate this, if you want to do it with me, it's a good opportunity for you to go in Visual Studio and check this out. Guys, as an example, again, if you're not comfortable with programming with Visual Studio and C#, come exam time, you will be in trouble. Please learn how to do this, work with it, play with the environment, so that way, come exam time, there's no issues. So I go to Menus and Toolbars, and again, 2 ways of doing it. I can drag and drop, or I can double click. I'm going to drag and drop. And when I do that, on the bottom here, I get this component menu strip 1, like I showed, like you've seen. So there's different ways. If I actually click on the menu itself, not the actual name of the component on the menu, the item on the menu. I'm not clicking here. If I click here, somewhere on the menu, on the right, and if I look at my properties, right, as an example, I have all these different options, right? And if I look at the collection property for my items, if I click on the ellipses, right, it's going to pull up my the collection editor, which is actually showing me, here's my menu strip, and if I want to add a menu item, I could add a menu item. And if you notice, there's different options here, combo box, text box, I can do whatever I want. Here I just want to add a menu item, so I could actually do it this way as well, Okay, so right from here, from the collection property of my menu item. I can also do it from the smart tip right here. So this little arrow that's next to the menu item when it's active. So if I click on the form, the menu seems to be invisible. You can't actually click on it, but I actually click on the form, the menu item, the menu strip, then I got this little arrow. And if I click there, I can actually go to edit items here, as an example, and it pulls up this items collection editor as well. The other thing that you notice is that the dock, it actually tells me where I've docked my menu. So right now, standard menus are docked on the top. You can choose them to be docked where you want, on the side, if you really want to, if you want to make some kind of custom app that way, and so on. This is kind of a newer feature, not available in some earlier versions of Visual Studio and C#. And the render mode, right, which we're not going to kind of talk about, system, professional, or managed render mode. Grip style, like as an example, you can make it so that it's visible or hidden, and so on. And if you make it so it's hidden, that means you can't move the menu around, right? So if I make it visible, right, as an example, so here's my grip style. If you notice this little grip that comes up, right, it allows me to move my menus around, right? Like some other applications allow you to move them around to customize where you put the menu. So again, if I click on this little arrow, that's one way of doing it. I can also right-click, right, and it'll allow me to click on properties, right, and then from there, it'll go right to my collection property from there, and so on. And there's other ways of doing it as well. But I really like this little smart arrow here, and you're going to see it on most little objects, like on your screen. Drag and drop any object on the screen, you'll get that little, smart arrow. And then from there, you can do some quick modifications, right? So again, if it's made visible right now, I can edit the items, or I can choose not to. Let's add an item. So I'm going to add in that file. So I'm going to put ampersand file. It's going to actually point to two things. I can click below the ampersand to exit. So let's say I want to choose another item, but it's going to be a sub-item, as an example. And maybe I want to make it so it's E ampersand X IT for my exit. So there's my exit button right there that I've created. If I run the file, the actual the app, and I haven't done really anything, it'll appear. Here it is, and I'll have my file menu, and then there's my exit option right here. And if you notice, because I've made the handles visible, it allows me to actually see this. Now, I can't still drag and drop because I haven't enabled that option on my menu. I have to kind of program how my menu functions if I can drag and drop it anywhere and so on. Okay, so in this particular case, making the handles visible for our application, not necessary. Let's go back. So I go back to this little smart object here, and I change the grip style to hidden because it doesn't really help us in our case. And we have our first menu item. Okay, so again, if you notice, it says I can actually go into my item collection editor to do my modification, and instead of going to the smart tag, if I go back to my item collection editor, if I go to my smart tag here, and I go to my edit items, and here's my file tool strip menu item, right? And if I look underneath it, remember I have an exit button, but where is it? Right, where's my sub-menu item here, right? Sorry? Is there a drop-down for this, right? Because it's what I'm looking at, right? Like for now, I'm actually looking at this file tool strip menu item, and if you go further down, and if you scroll down to the file tool strip menu item, under the collection, if I click on this again, I'm actually going to be able to go dig deeper with the next ellipses down to the next item, right? So I can actually look at what my file menu is going to look like. So again, it's a tool strip drop-down menu, and I got my exit button. Okay, so the way I did that again was I looked at my file menu item, and I clicked the collections ellipses next to that, and then again I pull that up. Right, so I can pull up the sub-items when I click this. These are the sub-items underneath my file menu, which is the exit menu, exit option. Okay? Yeah, so under drop-down items, when I've got my items collection editor up, if you look at the little ellipses next to the collection, right here, if I click on that, then it pulls up my exit button. And I can kind of align which menu items are in a row. And sometimes people prefer to write their menu items here because they can control, you know, what they're called, and all the properties for that menu item alone is here, right? But sometimes it's just for us shifting things around, right? So for example, let's say I'm on my file menu. Here I am, right? And I've got exit, and you know what? I'm like, oh damn, I forgot how to put save. So I put in the ampersand save option, and then maybe I'm going to have an ampersand new, right? And I'm like, I don't want it to be this order, right? I want to fix those up. I can't do it here. I can't like drag and drop an item from here around always in an easy fashion. So it's easier just to go here, edit items, and then when I go to my file tool strip menu item, and if I go to my collections under my drop-down items, and I click on the ellipses, right? Now here's my order, exit, save, and new, and I can move them up. I can say, well, you know what? I think probably new should be first, and then save, right, kind of thing. We don't have an open. I could add a menu item. So if I want to add a menu item here, I could. Here it is. Here's new tool strip menu item, save, exit, and then some other one, right? And I probably want to keep it in the same format as this one, right? Because, you know, the name of my object is important, right? So I can skip down here, and it says tool strip menu item 1. If I leave it the way it is here and I click OK, and OK, it's going to be ugly, right? It's going to be, you know, tool strip menu item 1, right? Which is kind of ugly. I don't want that. So I want to modify that. I want to be able to change the properties. I can actually do it here. So if I click on this item itself, and then it'll actually appear here on the properties menu as well. So this is the other way to do it. So I want to change my text property of my tool strip menu to, example, would be open, if that makes sense. And I'm probably going to need some kind of a shortcut. So I'm going to put, you know, with an O, right? There it is. There's open. And I'm probably going to have to rename this thing too, right? Because the name of my object is tool strip menu item 1, which doesn't make any sense, right? So I could do it here, or if I want to keep the same naming convention and move it around, I might as well do it here in my editor. So I go to the little smart tag, edit items, and then go into there, collections, drop downs. I can do it this way too. I can move this around, so I want to have new, and then I want to put the open, and you know, as an example, the name of my object will be in alphabetical order, right? So I go down, look for it. Here it is, name. And I know it's probably best to call it the same as everything else. So tool strip menu item, it makes sense, right? So I'm going to probably put something like open tool strip menu item, right? And I can get rid of tool strip just to keep consistent with everything, my other naming conventions, because I haven't up to this point. I created it after the fact, and the rest were created, the names were created by Visual Studio. So just keeping with the same convention, I've just changed it manually here. Right now, if I press OK, and OK, and when I go to my menu, I see that there's new, open, save, and exit, which is typically what we see in most applications. OK, let's go back. So we've kind of covered this, and this, and this. So if I want to put a separator, because sometimes I want to put a separator bar in there, I have a lot of menus, and to kind of represent a separation between one type of object and another, sometimes it's good to put a separator in. And you can see, again, sticking with regular conventions, if we go down again to Visual Studio, if I look at my file menu, there's a separator bar between the open and add and the close. I don't have a close option. And the exit, definitely the exit has a little separator bar, right? So we can try and do that as well. So if I look at my my form here again, and there's different ways I can do it. Again, I can insert, right, a combo box, a menu item, a text box. As an example, this is one thing I could do, right? I can make it checked. I can make it enabled. These are all options that just by clicking on the menu itself. Right, what I can do here. If I actually click on the item, though, I can actually insert a separator bar. So here's my separator bar, and I can actually move this around. I know I definitely want this above the exit, right? And so here's my separator bar. I'm actually pulling it, and I'm putting it above the exit, right? similarly, if I pull the save and I pull that kind of down, and without going to the can I do it, if I want to put the save underneath the exit, and yes, I can. So this is another way of doing it by moving the items around, just physically dragging and dropping them wherever you want. So I definitely want the save up there, so I'm going to put it above the, if I don't do it properly, it's going to be screwed up. So there's my separator bar. So again, when I look at it now, my separator bar will appear above my exit option, right? So if I run the code again, let me just make sure that it runs in center screen, because I like that. I don't like the default start position of my windows, and you're going to see me asking for it a lot in your assignments, right? Everyone's different there, so it may not be relevant in your particular app, but typically I like my apps running kind of in the middle of my screen, right? Not over here in the corner, right? And it's also not a full screen app, so I don't have to worry about that. So if you notice here, File, New, Open, Save, they don't do anything right now because these I haven't programmed what they do, but there's the separator right there. Right. All right. So again, there is in your PowerPoint presentation or the PDF that I've put up online. There's kind of a step-by-step that covers what I just did. You can look at the video as well as going through this step-by-step. You're going to have a requirement like this. Looks just like this on the top of your assignments, where it says there's going to be a little box that shows you what I want as a menu. Again, these are the minimum requirements from an assignment perspective of what I need to put on your menu. Okay, so File and then an exit. A help and an about, as an example, would be your requirements in this particular little assignment if you had it like this, right? So you'd have to make these menus, right? So try now, take a few minutes, practice putting together a little menu, 2 seconds, right? You can follow the step-by-step here, right, as an example, and then so I'll give you a few minutes to do that, and then we will, if you notice, it goes on to the next page as well. We're going to talk about the code, how to write the code for the menu. So take a few minutes to do that. Anyone have any questions when we're talking about menus? Again, kind of a neat feature. If you look at some of the other C# books, and keep working while I'm talking, guys, but if you look at some of the other C# books out there, the book I'm working with, again, to create some of this stuff, talks about menus and forms, because that's really what we're working on from the get-go. We're doing almost like a app-based approach to learning C#, right? Other books will make you write a console application first and make you learn C# like you've never programmed before. But it doesn't really make any sense for our application here in this course, right? So what we want to try and do when we're actually running this, our apps, is kind of put together all the components we need. And menu is kind of like one of the last things they teach you in other books. Menus, context menus, all this kind of stuff. It's not something that they really focus on, right? I'm going to still ask for them. You will see menus on your exam as an option, right? So you might have it as one of the components in your exam. Some of you have emailed me saying, so what's on the exam? What's going to be for the exam for week 7? And the answer for you is, you're probably going to see some of the same stuff you've seen in assignment 1 and assignment 2, right? With maybe some other extra functions you've never used before. As an example, I'm going to ask you to use them. Say, here's a function. This is how it works. Use it. One of those kind of things. So you should be able to know how to do that fairly simply. The other thing I'll probably make you do is you're going to be completing an app, right? I won't ask you to write an app from scratch, and you won't have to do an external document, obviously, for your external for your exam. Doesn't make any sense. But you will have, an assignment-like exam file that you can get up online. It'll be available on the day of your exam in Blackboard. So you'll go into your assignments. You'll see exam 1 or whatever it'll be called, right? And then under there, you'll see the exam, requirements. What do you need to do to build your app? And then you'll have 2.5 hours thereabouts to do it. At the end of that time, we'll call it a day, and then you'll be on your merry way, and you'll have your break for a week. Right? We'll see you back in 2 weeks after that. Right? So practice. If you haven't done your Visual Studio and you do it the last minute and all that kind of stuff, and you're not good at using these tools, again, I would urge you to practice. Okay, so we've done the menus, let's say. You put together a menu for yourself, and now you want to code the menu, as an example. how do we do that? Well, it's kind of very similar to the way we do it for buttons, right? So if I want to program the exit button here on my menu, I double click on it, and then it automatically forms this exit tool strip menu item underscore click event handler, right? So here I would again code it. I would say, terminate the program, right? Terminate the program, and then underneath there I would probably put a this dot close, right? And that would close up my form, right? Now, at the same time, now that I've coded it, that's cool. But remember, if I create an exit button, and again, I'll just go to buttons here. So I create an exit button here on my form. I put it on my form because I want my exit button to work. Maybe I'll call this button, exit button, which makes sense, right? You can use standard C# conventions for doing so. And let's say the text for the button will be called exit. And I want to put an ampersand here as well, just to kind of say that there's both ways. If they don't go to the menu, they can exit directly through a button. So I put the E ampersand X, kind of thing. Click away. Here it is, exit. And I could double click on this and write my own event procedure here, another event handler. Or, again, I think the better way to do it would be to click on this little lightning icon in your properties, which will bring up all the different kinds of events that you could write for your button. And again, if you wanted to write an event that doesn't do the click, let's say, for example, a context menu strip changed, right? If you double click on one of these events, it will actually write the stub for the event in your code. Okay? And we'll go over that in a bit. So let's say I already have an exit tool strip menu item. I want to use that same one, that same event handler. I can just choose it like we did last time. So now both the exit button, here's the exit button, and the exit menu, and the exit button, they use the same code because I've only written this, right? I haven't changed this around, right? So I want to reuse my code. I don't want to use two sets of code that do this dot close. Doesn't make any sense, even for this little one strip of code. I want to reuse my event handler. I don't want to write new ones for each button, event, icon, whatever that I'm writing. I want to have all of them share one. Makes sense. Okay. I could enable and disable certain options. For example, I could disable when I start up my form itself. I could ask that until the user does something, certain options on my menu are disabled programmatically. I could do it on design time, so I can actually go through and click the properties on the type of menu item. So here I am. I'm on design view, and I choose the new button, right? Or sorry, the save button, and I haven't opened up anything, right? And if you notice on the right, here because I've activated the save, if I look at the enabled, let's go to the actual enabled option here. The enabled is true, right? So I could programmatically put this as false. From a design time, set it to false. So now it's grayed out, okay? And actually, that's the same for all controls. If I want to gray out certain controls, whether it's or make them invisible, I could change the visible property or the enabled property so that they're enabled or disabled or true or false. So let's look at how this works. So if I run it again, here I've disabled the save option because there's nothing for me to save. So if I click on it, even if it was programmed, it wouldn't work, right? And let's suppose that I want to do this from a programmatically. So when the form opens, so on the open event, so let's say I go back to enabled, and I make this true. So I might say my default is enabled, but when I open my form up, I go to now I haven't actually launched my form event. So let's just go there. So if I double click the form itself, it creates that form load event, right? So when the form loads, I want certain options to be enabled or disabled. You can do it here too, so I can actually start programming it in. So I don't know what it's called, and I want my save tool strip menu item to be disabled, all right, or to show if it's enabled or disabled. So I can start typing. So IntelliSense will start saying, hey, you're talking about the save tool strip menu item, right? And then I click my dot accessor, as we normally do, and I look at enabled, right? Because that's the property that we would normally access on the properties side, right? Within the design portion of Visual Studio, right? And then I can basically say, well, I want it to be false, right? So my save tool strip menu item, when I load my form, immediately will change to false programmatically, right? So here I go back, I save all, and when I start my code, here it is, start my program, you notice that my save menu item is disabled, even though when I look at my options here, from an enable perspective in design view, right, it shows enabled is equal to true. So as soon as I load my form, that event fires. Again, I'm listening for my form load event, and then when my form load event fires, I put my commands in there, and then it'll trigger whatever I choose to trigger. Yes?
Is there any particular advantage to the form load versus the
design view?
Design view, yeah.
Sometimes you may require, for example, when you're shifting between forms. Let's say you have more than one, it's a multi-form application, and you want to ensure when you shift back that everything shifts to its default state. That's where you would do it, because if you would remember, like for example, if you shifted away from Form 1 and went to Form 2, as an example, and you've already selected options in Form 1, but you want them when you shift back to Form 1 again, through a back button or something, that it goes back to the way it was, the defaults, then that's where a good place would be to put them in that form load, because every time the form loads up, right, it'll reset, as an example. And there's other ways, there's other reasons why, but typically no, you would, I mean, I think, to me, it's easier for you to set everything, your defaults should be set in on your properties, right? Because at the end of the day, you're programming, whether you're doing it visually, it's happening on the design side, and there's a design document that's being updated, modified, right? So there's remember, you're creating a partial class. The partial class is being split over your CS file and your design file, right? So if you do it from a design perspective, the partial class will be updated on the design document. And if you do it from a programmatic perspective, like inside the code, coding-wise, it'll your partial class will be updated in your code view, right? So either way, it's fine. It's really up to you from a preference perspective and what makes sense. Okay. Sometimes you want to put a check mark on a particular menu item, and you can check if, I'm not going to go over how to do this, you can see this on the PowerPoints. If you want to put a check mark next to the item, you can actually right-click onto the item, the item itself and click the check mark on. You can also programmatically do it. Summary tool strip menu item is an example. Here's the summary tool, summary submenu item. You can you actually click the checked on, right? And sometimes what you want to do is, this is a great way. We use this for, let's say, toolbars, right? So you might have an option called toolbars, submenu of toolbars, like under a view menu, and you want to turn off and on certain toolbars. You may want to have them checked on or off. That's what we typically see that for. Or you may have an option. You want to see a properties, a floating properties window that comes up, as an example, and you want that appearing or disappearing. That's where I would use the check mark, or something similar to that from a functionality perspective. Okay, and you can check for that if it's true or not by checking if that particular tool strip menu item is checked or not. Okay, here's the keyboard shortcuts we're talking about here. You can actually specify the keyboard shortcuts, all right? So example would be, again, if I go back to Visual Studio, right, and I want to specify the keyboard shortcut for my exit button, right? And if I look down here, as an example, there's, where is it here? Sorry, probably be under here. That'll be okay. If you look through here, it'll actually show you the shortcut keys. Here it is right here, right? And notice there's another option here, that the shortcut key display string, you can actually put that in here too, right? You actually type it in manually, right? So let's say I want to choose a shortcut key, and I want to say that the shortcut key for exit is, I don't know, Control and X, right? So you actually would pick the key that you want to use. It's probably down here, right? And then you say, you kind of click away. So there's Control plus X. But even if it's that way, if you notice, automatically it kind of displays it, but you can change what's displayed by putting something else here if you wanted to. Okay? So here's my shortcut X. So here it is, exit, Control plus X, right? And it would appear here, right? So if I run it again, and I go, if I actually click on Control and X, it'll disappear. So the shortcut key actually works. So you can program all your shortcut keys just like that. It'll appear right in the menu, and then there will be assignment requirements coming forward where I want to ask you to, to show me your shortcut keys on your menu and program these shortcut keys and all that kind of stuff. It might be in an exam, as an example, and this is the way you do it. Okay. And again, we talked about standards, but this is the kind of the standard tool strip menu: File, Edit, View, Format, Help, and so on. Again, I would take a look at some other applications that are out there if you're going to model yours after. So let's pause there, and I think I need a drink of water, and you guys need to get some coffee and take a bio break, and look at the girl as you pass by, right? Because she's the only girl that's here, right? And then we'll go from there.